Thank you, Mr. President. I am as enamored and in love with our Constitution as anyone. It is, I concede, the greatest charter for government that's ever been devised in the history of the world. But it is not, nor has it ever been, perfect. It was required that the citizens of this country amend the Constitution to abolish the institution of human slavery, the 13th Amendment. As we discussed recently on the floor of the Senate, the entire Bill of Rights, which we also love and revere, came about as amendments proposed to the United States Constitution. The Second Amendment, which we were discussing this week and last week, was not part of the original document, nor was the first, restraining Congress's ability or authority to act in ways that infringed upon the rights of the people to petition the government for redress of grievances, to operate a free press, as we'll discuss later this week, to exercise religion freely. It was not perfect when, during that hot summer of 1787 in Philadelphia, but the wisdom, and let me, if I may, just talk for a minute about who was there. Someone mentioned Thomas Jefferson. He was not there. The representatives from Virginia, Mr. President, were Mr. Blair, a gentleman by the name of James Madison, whom we regard as the father of the Constitution, and a gentleman we've all heard of by the name of George Washington, who presided over the proceedings in that hot summer of 1787. The delegate from New York was Alexander Hamilton. From Pennsylvania were Robert Morris, Gouverneur Morris, Benjamin Franklin. I'm not going to read everyone who was at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. But they knew enough to know that nothing is perfect. Nothing of this earth, anyway, is perfect. And they left within the document mechanisms for future generations to make corrections when necessary. And as has been mentioned by others, we've adopted a total of 27 amendments to that Constitution, amendments that were proposed by the Congress, including the last one, which was adopted in 1992, but proposed in 1789. The 27th Amendment to the United States Constitution was one of the original amendments proposed by the first Congress in New York in 1789 and not ratified by the requisite number of states until 1992. So these things do, on occasion, take a long time. And like the gentleman from Upshur, I would suggest that we need not fear ourselves, our states. This other mechanism to compel Congress to call together a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments exists in the document, in the Constitution, as the final recourse when Congress will not act to propose necessary amendments. And as the gentleman from Upshur pointed out, it may never go to a convention of the states. On other occasions in our history, when the states have done what we should now do, stood up and said, Congress, you have to act, and called for such a convention, ultimately, the Congress has capitulated. Popular election of senators was such an occurrence. Popular election of U.S. senators. I am sufficiently confident that the ratification process, which would require the assent of 38 states, provides an adequate check on anything odd such a convention might do or recommend if it were convened. Mr. President, the threat to our liberty at the moment, the greater threat to our liberty, is not a call for or by the people to act to revise our structure of government. The greater threat to our liberty is inaction. Inaction. As was mentioned, a national debt fast approaching $20 trillion. Of code of federal regulations that would fill this room probably. The members of the Constitutional Convention in 1787 surely never imagined our modern regulatory state. But a limitation on the power of the federal government that I would love to see, and I'm willing to put my name upon and my vote behind this resolution for the purpose of pushing toward, is something that we do here in West Virginia. A limitation that I think is reasonable in the power of the federal government would be simply that no regulation of the federal government be effective upon the people unless and until the Congress approved it. Think about that. In our rulemaking process, we empower executive branch agencies to make proposed rules and regulations, but we don't give them carte blanche to impose them on the people. We require them to be reviewed and approved by the elected officials, the House, the Senate, and the governor in the form of legislation. Because of the absence of that authority, oversight in Washington, we see things that are incredulous if you think about it. Members of Congress standing up and decrying the breadth of regulations imposed upon the people. But the Congress gave them the power. I would like to see a limitation on that. That no executive branch agency of the federal government has authority to bind the people to rules or regulations unless and until they're approved by Congress. If that were the case, we wouldn't have things that we have right now in this country. Regulatory agencies of the federal government imposing rules and regulations that have been expressly rejected by the Congress. I do not fear the exercise of the authority expressly given to the people to control the federal government. Mr. President, I could go on longer, but I'll spare everyone that. I urge adoption of the resolution.